First of all, I want to introduce this as a new thing that we're doing in between our the bigger works that we review and analyze. We're going to be reviewing shorter works, essays and short stories and, articles, all sorts of things, depending on who among us decides on which one. Today, we are reviewing and discussing an unwritten novel by Virginia Woolf, who happens to be my favorite writer. I have read this story about, like I was mentioning to Daniel, about 4 or 5 times in my life. And it's still a bit of an enigma to me, but I think that's okay because I'm a big fan of taking forever to figure out what a writer is doing. There's a lot to take in here, but try to just give you a nub of what is going on. The narrator is on a train from London to Surrey, and she's doing essentially what my mother used to do, which is people watch. And it used to drive me crazy, but there's a method to everyone's madness. She is looking at these people on the train car where she's sitting, and she starts making up stories. My mother used to do the same thing. She would look at somebody walking along the street or something, and she would lean over to me and start explaining this person's history or their backstory. And I was like, Mom. But anyway, so this is what the narrator is doing in this story. But there are very important reasons why. And some of it has to do, or most of it has to do, with the time that this was written and what Virginia Woolf was engaged in externally in being part of the Bloomsbury group, a group of people who are or were bringing in thought to various areas of society in a very new and unrecognized revolutionary way, not just literature, but economics and all sorts of things. Anyway, in terms of the work she did in this book and how it reflects that, she's on this train and they're going to Surrey. And over a short period of time, everybody on the car, the other passengers, get off at various stops because this is a commuting train. People are going wherever they're going. And only one person is left, and it's this woman, an older woman who's sitting there looking a bit morose as far as the narrator is concerned. So she starts thinking about who this woman is and where she's going and where she came from and what her thoughts are. She starts observing her behavior, and she's sitting there by herself and she seems pretty morose or upset. She seems that way to the narrator. The narrator is watching her closely, sort of checking out her behavior. And the one thing that jumps out at her is that the woman starts rubbing the wall on the train really, really hard, like she's trying to rub out a stain on the wall. And so the narrator starts going off on this sort of a slippery slope about what this stain is and why she's trying to get rid of it. Is it a sin from the past? Is it some horrible thing that either she did or a member of her family did or whatever, something? The story keeps going on, and she starts making up in her imagination who this woman is, what this woman is thinking, where she's going, why she's going. And that essentially covers the story. That's the whole story. And it ends with an interesting, it could be, you could see it as a twist. It ends with the reality that she sees that everything she thought of in reality was wrong, because the woman ended up meeting up with her, I think it was her son, at the train station. And it was a very sort of loving thing. But because the story that she had manipulated in her imagination about this woman was pretty dark. And some of it was valid, I guess, because the woman who she named Minnie. Right?
Minnie.
Yeah. And one of the things that she did, I think she heard Minnie complaining about her sister-in-law, and she sort of went off on that. There's really no significant plot because that's not really the point of the story. The point of the story is what really and they've talked about it as sort of a metafiction and parable and all kinds of things, because what's really happening is that Virginia Woolf or the narrator are creating a character in order to include that character in a story or another book or something. And so this really is an exercise or writer's exercise of developing a character. And it really was, I think she was very pointed about it because she was a member of the Bloomsbury group in the 1920s. And they were, investigating all of these new ways to think and analyze and discuss all kinds of things, fiction being just one of them. E.M. Forster was one of the members of this group. And so this came out of it, the way she was approaching the development of this particular character in this short story. And again, like I say, people who discuss it, academics, have found it to sort of represent metafiction, a sort of hyper step back process that she's doing. And as you've noticed, that she breaks the fourth wall a number of times, commenting on the story that she is creating about this character. Anyway, I wanted to highlight something to clarify or support what I'm saying here. In metafictions, okay, like a number of academics have cited this story as, the narrator's like kind of commenting more or less on the process that they're going through in creating this character. Okay, and this quote comes from Parody and Metafiction, Virginia Woolf's An Unwritten Novel by Laura Rodriguez. And she says, parody is itself one of the essential qualities of metafictional narrative, which implies an exploration of difference and similarity. An unwritten novel overtly plays with naive realist conventions, all of these elements which intervene in the construction of Minnie's character and her story by means of the ironic use of a certain literary codes that no doubt the reader will recognize. Yet the story goes beyond mere ridicule, mockery, and destruction. An unwritten novel is an example of how metafiction parodies and imitates as a way to a new form. It is not what the story tells, and this is, I think, really critical. It's not what the story tells that is important, but the way in which it is told, which becomes the core of this kind of narrative, as the narrator applies with his or her comments that break the fourth wall. Like when she says, what is it? Have I read you right? ? Hang still, she's saying to Minnie, then quiver, life, soul, spirit, whatever you are of Minnie Marsh. So metafiction lays bare these realist conventions in order to re-examine them and to offer a fictional form that is currently relevant. Parody, as a literary strategy, deliberately sets itself up to break the norms that have become conventionalized, while fusing, on the other hand, creation and critique. At this point in her literary development, Virginia Woolf felt the need to surpass realist conventions, as well as its major fictional embodiment, namely the novel, precisely by laying them bare while inventing what she saw as a new form, drawing from the language of parable and metaphor. As a result, the unwritten novel closes with the narrator's awareness that reality, and this is what I referred to earlier, is continually being appraised and reformulated, appearing as a complex web of interrelating multiple realities, which is precisely what makes both life and fiction so fascinating. So, coming off of that analysis that I just read, if you're looking for a short story, okay, that's not here. This is a study in developing character. And I'm also trying to say this was a new way of thinking about character and fiction in the 1920s. And that's, what is really interesting about this. And and the other interesting thing is, at the end of the story, this woman gets Minnie, who we don't know if that's her real name, right? But she gets off the train, and the narrator is watching her get off the train, and she meets up with her son and has a very sort of loving, embrace. But my point is that reality comes in and throws off imagination. That's what all this is. That's what this whole story is the imagination developing this. As a writer, and it's very exciting for me to read this kind of thing, because I thought a lot about how characters are developed. And I have found in my own writing, we all write what we know in fiction and nonfiction, but in fiction, we go many different places with it. It's not like a story. It was a investigation into developing a character as a writer, and it was new. It was revolutionary.
I think that this is basically a satire of of the writing process. And I think that basically it's a way of saying that authors are people too, that they when they look at a person and they try to come up with a story about that person, they often rely on melodrama. The narrator is looking at this woman on a train, has a very brief conversation with the woman on the train, and there's only a few snatches of conversation, few phrases from the conversation that go into the actual story, such as I'm reading now from the story. Okay, the unhappy woman leaning a little forward, palely and colorlessly addressed me, talked of stations and holidays, of brothers at Eastbourne, and the time of the year, which was, I forget now, early or late. In any event, then the woman says, and this is a quote, "Staying away, that's the drawback of it." And then the quote breaks off. And the narrator says, now we approach the catastrophe. And here's another quote: "My sister-in-law," close quote.
Right.
The bitterness of her tone was like lemon on cold steel. And
Love
speaking,
that one, by the way. Go on. Sorry.
the
Sorry.
bitterness of her tone was like lemon on cold steel, and speaking not to me, but to herself, she muttered, quote, "Nonsense," she would say. That's what they all say, close quote. And while we spoke, she fidgeted as though the skin on her back were as a plucked fowl's in a poulterer's shop window. Then the woman, quote again, "Oh, that cow," she broke off nervously, as though the great wooden cow in the meadow had shocked her and saved her from some indiscretion. It's such a strange moment where I don't, what I'd be curious to know is whether it was English usage at the time to use the word cow as an insult. Right. I for a second there, I thought, is the woman on the train saying, my sister-in-law is a cow? But apparently what she's saying is that she saw some sort of wooden cow in a meadow, and it shocked her and interrupted her train of thought. But in any event, there's very little left of what they actually discuss, the narrator and this woman. The narrator mentions at one point, sisters-in-law, I said, and the woman's lips purse as, quote, as if to lips spit venom at the word, i.e. sisters-in-law. Which gets the narrator to thinking that there must be some sort of odd enmity between the woman and her sister-in-law. In any event, going on, the conversation
that's when
breaks
she starts
off.
rubbing the
Right. That's when she starts rubbing the spot on the window of the train,
right.
which obviously
window,
is some sort of allusion to Macbeth. It's I think the reason that it's such an obvious allusion, the reason that Woolf does that, I think, is because the narrator has in the back of her mind, I'll just assume it's a woman, the narrator, has in the back of her mind Macbeth. Macbeth is never mentioned, right? But she has in the back of her mind stories and the sort of narratives, this kind of standard narratives that people like to read, and in a way she's projecting those narratives onto this woman. And so when she sees this woman start rubbing out this spot on a window on a train, and but after slightly referring to her sister-in-law and kind of having a mean tone about it, a kind of negative tone, the narrator immediately thinks, oh, there has to be some sort of tension between her and the sister-in-law. She kind of jumps in and keeps on inventing things for this woman.
Because
she's what?
Developing a character. She's writing a character with her imagination.
Yes.
She's looking at this woman and putting in a backstory.
Right. But I mean, the interesting thing about it, to my mind, is that it struck me as comedic. The effect, I think, is mostly comedic. Do you remember? So I haven't seen this new Beatles movie come out, but there's the famous there's now the famous clip of Paul McCartney just mumbling and strumming, and
he does that a lot.
Right. But 40 seconds into it, he basically hits on the critical hook of a song, right? That we all recognize immediately. And what this all struck me as,
so that's a meta situation.
Right.
You're watching him create. I'm sorry.
But this story struck me as being is sort of just not a situation where she, where we see her come up with like a brilliant thing, but it's more like looking at her fail at coming up with a brilliant thing, right? And and making a story out of her struggle to come up with something and ultimately failing. It's not like a horrible failure, right? I mean, it's all totally human and understandable, but it's very much humanizes the writing process, and it's like letting you see behind the scenes of a mind trying to come up with something, and kind of realizing that she's kind of falling back on melodrama a little bit, I think.
So it's interesting because as I read the story, I thought I feel exactly like this narrator every time I read anything. I feel like I go through and I make meaning where maybe there is none, maybe there is some. I make up a story. I come up with a coherent sort of idea or narrative about why these things are happening. And at the end of it, I don't get the point where she walks out and she hugs her son and we instantly know we were wrong, because the authors never really do that for us. They never say, this is what I meant. You're left to figure it all out for yourself. And I felt like, okay, this is exactly what I feel like. I feel like I go through, I take all of my own crap, which is what this narrator did, and I place it on to whoever's in front of me, and I make meaning out of whatever I see. But at the end of the day, everything has to be tied together. It all has to make sense. It has to be cohesive. And then I feel like I just find clues that support my theory. And there I have it. I have this story that I've made up that as a human mind, we just need to go through life, and we need to make meaning, and we need to make understanding, and we need to make a coherent narrative about what we see. And it makes us feel better. And then when we're wrong, I mean, I don't know if when you heard that or when you read that story where she's like, wait, what? You're like so taken aback. You can imagine how taken aback she was to feel like she had completely convinced herself that this was true, even though she knew she was people watching, and she knew she was making this up, but it made so much sense. So that's kind of like the general feeling that I had. And then I felt like this was very similar to, oh my gosh, why do I have like dementia? I can't, what's the guy we just read his stories, short story, Hemingway.
Hemingway.
I felt like this is very Hemingway in the sense that, or Hemingway is very her, I don't, obviously, but she's later, or he's later, but you read Hemingway short stories and they're just like a snapshot of something happening.
They are. Exactly.
And then you read them and you go back, you read them like 5 times. And if you're like me, you're like, I don't know, I don't get it. And then you go and you read, I got obsessed with reading literary articles about Hemingway. And I would read for one short story, it would be like 20 different articles, and particularly Old Man of the Sea. There were 20 different perspectives and 20 different meanings. And so, they were all so different. And you took so much out of them. And in the same way, if you go through each paragraph, there's the eggs, there's God, there's all these different like symbolic things, the spot in the window, the sea, all these different things that I think are like in Hemingway stories, they mean so much. There's so much packed into these. And so she touches on, like, we could pick one thing, I guess, Like, what do the eggs mean? What does it mean? You know, that, I don't know, there's several things throughout the story that I think are kind of her, to me, her way of sort of commenting on societal norms about women, just different issues that seem to be happening in the day. And that's kind of what I'm most interested in, are like, what are the little Easter eggs in here, like, that she put?
Right.
So as a whole, I think we all have a similar feeling that, like, you know, obviously this is a person's people watching, and whether you call it developing a character, I mean, I like that, that analysis, that it's a satire of writing, but I think it's also just human nature. We make stories up, like, when somebody doesn't respond to our text, you know, we make it mean so much, and really they just like didn't see their phone or whatever, you know.
You
Like, I
mean
think
like
it's,
when you're being ghosted, and then you come up
yeah,
with
Yeah.
like
like
an
when you're ghosted
elaborate
and then you realize
theory?
that you've ghosted someone, and you're like, oh my
Right.
God, why do texts not have like mark as unread, you know, because
Right,
I
right.
forget. Or like, I look and I'm so pissed that that person didn't respond to me, and I realize that I've only typed it and I didn't hit send, you know.
Yeah,
Like, all
exactly.
the
Oh, me
stories that you made up
too.
in your head are just
All the time.
completely false. And
I
I
always
think,
forget to hit send.
so I think there's something of that in this story too. But I mean, I think the fact that we all take these different meanings from it, it speaks to, I mean, we're talking the skeletal outline, right, of this novel right now, in terms of, she's a people watcher and she's wrong. She makes up a story and she's wrong. But really, there's
But
so
what does
much.
that mean when you say wrong? How can that be?
What
How
do you
I
can
mean?
she
mean,
be
by
wrong?
her own standard, she is trying to almost read this person's mind and understand the truth of the person. And then she realizes that her guess is wrong. And that, it's a funny thing that she thinks that she can, read minds kind of, but,
Well,
she
yeah, I
obviously
mean,
can't.
and the funny thing is, she might be only somewhat wrong. So in fact, yes, this person does have a son, but does that mean that she doesn't have some thing that she feels tremendously guilty about? I mean, it would
Yeah,
be
but
interesting to see a different half of this story where they develop the actual character that she's talking about, and to see in what ways she was wrong and in what ways she actually was right on the money. Because I think we do have the ability to read people. Do you guys, like, they use the word physiognomy a lot in like Dostoevsky novels, and back in the time they really believed that like your face would tell everything about you. Like,
everything.
couldn't get away from the truth of your
Right.
face. And then I was listening to some book recently, it was some Malcolm Gladwell book about these people who study every like muscle in the face, and how we have this ability to read these micro expressions, and how they tell so much about you. And for example, like, autistic people do not have the ability to read those facial expressions. They just see it as an object. Whereas people, the whole book, the Malcolm Gladwell book, is about like your gut instinct and how you have knowledge that you don't realize
Right.
that you have. And you kind of get a sense of people, and they talked a lot about those facial expressions, and they were able to like slow down videos of people who said they were doing fine, but the doctor like had a sense that they weren't. Anyway, had planned to leave like the mental facility that they were going to go kill themselves, and they, long
Right.
story short, they slowed down the video and showed like the flashes of information that you could get in a person's facial expression that would reveal the truth. So like, she was basically doing that. She was reading the grimace that she had right at the moment that she mentioned the word sister-in-law, and like certain things, she was picking up on it. So I think there was probably a lot of that was she may not have been accurate in the details, but I think she probably is a good people watcher, is a good reader of faces, because she's pretty.
Let me just say, one of the things that is concerning me is that using the word wrong.
Well, no, I'm not saying wrong. Don't make it mean more than it means. What I'm saying is, she admits herself that her analysis of this woman having no children and being like this childless woman is incorrect.
Yeah, but then, okay, so.
So you know what I'm saying?
I mean, that matters to the character, right? I
No,
mean,
it matters to the author. Just because she realizes that the character, the woman, and the character she was imagining this woman to actually be, actually wasn't that character. So what? she still has a character to use. She can use the character that she imagined in whatever novel or story or whatever she writes. In other words, we all develop characters. Like I say, we all create things from what we know, but it doesn't necessarily mean it is actually in reality what we know. And that's good. We don't want reality.
I mean, that's fine. But I think that if you're looking at the story from the perspective of this person is developing a character, and so she's going to go use it later. I am reading the story for what it is on paper, which is a person sitting on a train making up a story that she seems to have bought into by the end of the pages. And then what happens at the end is her seeing that she is in fact incorrect, and that the reality has seeped in to let her know that she is incorrect. And she says at the end, what does she say?
At the end, she says it's not good enough that she came up with a character. It's not good enough to have a character that isn't true to life. I honestly think that the end, when she says, it's you, unknown figures, you I adore. If I open my arms, it's you I embrace. You I draw to me, adorable world. She's not just like, oh, I'm existing in my imagination and that's good enough for me. She's saying that I really want to connect with the adorable world, right? And get it right.
The unknown figures. It's the unknown figures that she wants to connect with because they're unknown and they can't be known.
So let me just read the last paragraph in its entirety.
Okay.
And yet the last look of them, he stepping from the curb and she following him round the edge of the big building, brims me with wonder, floods me anew. Mysterious figures, mother and son. Who are you? Why do you walk down the street? Where tonight will you sleep? And then tomorrow? Oh, how it whirls and surges, floats me afresh. I start after them. People drive this way and that. The white light splutters and pours. Plate glass windows, carnations, chrysanthemums, ivy in dark gardens, milk carts at the door. Wherever I go, mysterious figures, I see you turning the corner. Mothers and sons, you. I hasten, I follow. This, I fancy, must be the sea. Gray is the landscape, dim as ashes. The water murmurs and moves. If I fall on my knees, if I go through the ritual, the ancient antics, it's you, unknown figures. You I adore. If I open my arms, it's you I embrace. You I draw me, adorable world. So to me, she it's refreshing, it's wonderful, it's relieving to know that she's made up this entire story, this dark story. I don't know, I could be wrong. Again, I could be like the narrator, I'm missing the mark completely, but the way I read it is just that she's like, I'm totally wrong and this is wonderful, and it keeps me wondering, and I keep trying to figure out what is life.
I mean, preceding that, there's another critical line where the narrator thinks, what do I stand on? What do I know? Yeah. That's not Minnie. There was never a Mugridge, which is another character she came up with as a sort of backstory. Right. Who am I? Life's bare as a bone.
It's like, you just think you have all these things that you know and these stories that you make up and you make this coherent narrative. And if you've ever been in therapy, this is the feeling that you get sometimes where you're just like, I'm trying to make sense of what happened and I'm making up a story and I'm telling myself what happened. And then something happens that changes the truth that you think you have, and it upends that. And it's both horrible, but it's also a relief to know that like you don't have it all figured out and there's always more to the story and there's different layers, and it's something, that something can always be found. And it's, I don't know. I think that's the part that I really like about the story, is that I do what she's done. I think we all do what she's done, is just kind of make up these stories about life. And then the fact that we don't know is comforting in a way.
Okay, I'm going to read a little bit from this other analysis of the story. His name is Christopher Jansma, and he was published in the Center for Fiction, which is in Brooklyn. The narrator in the story, after considering Minnie externally, considers what she sees what she's wearing, her face, what that all looks like, that rubbing the stain on the wall. After considering Minnie externally through her manners, tries to imagine what Minnie thinks about as she stares out the window. From the way Minnie picks at the spot on the window, the narrator guesses it is some sin in her past. That's layer one. Okay, remember this, layer one. She thinks Minnie might be praying, rubbing the window in some unconscious attempt to see God better. That's layer two. But then the narrator wonders something else that takes her down into layer three, meaning that has these analyses of Minnie, all right, summarizes these, thinks of these things, and what she's doing is comprising three layers of creating a character for a fictional character. So in other words, if it's a fictional character, there is no wrong character. There's no wrong.
Well, take it up with take it up with the narrator, because she doesn't agree.
Right. Seriously, why are you beating this with it? Like, it's fine. It's not like we're saying like there's something wrong or right. We're saying, like, I'm just saying, she literally says, oh, wait a second, this is like, who am I? Like, what does life mean? I was completely off. Like, she's got a son, and that's it. I'm just literally taking it from the text. I'm not saying.
No, I agree.
Okay, can I jump in here? So something that I think it's really interesting, if it's not just about her living in fantasy land and that's good enough. Like, I think it's really cool if I almost get a sense with this narrator that she has, if not like a romantic attraction, like a very elective affinity for this woman that she sees on the train, because the story begins with a really arresting sentence that's about seeing this woman on the train and just seeing her look, and you're instantly sort of magnetized to her. The first sentence is this: such an expression of unhappiness was enough by itself to make one's eyes slide above the paper's edge to the poor woman's face. Insignificant without that look, almost a symbol of destiny with it, i.e.
Symbol.
Yes, what does that mean? Why do you say it like that?
Because that reflects that this story is about writing a character, not about a woman who happens to meet her son at the end of the trip.
Okay.
This is a story of how a writer creates a character. That's why you see a lot of.
That is your opinion, but in nowhere in these pages does it say, footnote, this is a story about how a writer creates a character. Stories can have many, many, many meanings, and we can all take what we want. And I hear you that's what you think, but I don't agree.
Hold on. Let me read you one more academic analysis or summary. Creating a character. This story works breathlessly at developing a character. What she does in people watching this woman on the train through her thoughts and imaginations is creating a character. It's a process that writers go through. Watching woman's movements, where her eyes turn, her facial expressions, and with the few words of exchange they have, the narrator constructs the backstory. Now, I'm not sure where that's from. I can't remember, but it's some academic paper. So my point is in this, and I don't get mad at me. I totally respect your perspective on it. But my understanding and my deep belief is that this is a sort of a study. It's not, a practice in creating this character. It is not a story in and of itself, which is why it kind of is so thin, really, if you think about it.
But I don't think it is thin. Incredible. I don't think it is thin.
I mean thin in terms. I'm saying thin in terms of plot.
I think it's more about you see people. I actually think that it's not really about writing as such. I think it's really about those moments when we see someone and we just immediately have a sense of like, this person who I just randomly saw is suddenly so important to me. And the frame of an author writing about it is a way of dramatizing that in a situation, in a way that would be difficult if it was just you or me, or I don't know, I'm not an author, right? If it was just some like lawyer beginning to think about the person, right? Because there's not like an excuse for me to really develop my thoughts of suddenly being really attracted to this person.
Right. No, and I understand. And go ahead, Jen.
Well, I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. I'm saying this absolutely is, I'm certain, the way one develops a character when they write a story. But this is also something that someone does in everyday life all of the time. I do it all of the time.
Oh, and I think that's wonderful. I think that's wonderful.
And
I
that's
hope
what
we all do.
I'm saying I don't think that, you keep coming back to, why is she wrong? I don't understand why you keep coming back to that. That's my point. It is in fact what she says. It is in
I
fact
know.
what she talks about at the end. I'm
I
not
know.
making something up and analyzing and saying, this is wrong. I'm saying, these are the facts of the story. She told a story about a person that she made up in her head, which we all do, and which authors must do when they write. And then she saw the reality of it, and she had a reaction to the reality of the situation. And I thought the reaction, if you only care that she's developing a character, then everything after she sees her son is pointless. But I don't think that it is. Why did she continue on? Why did she write that last paragraph? There's something to that. You can't just leave that part out of the story.
Adorable
No,
is
and
such
I
a
totally agree.
adorable world. Adorable world is such a strong phrase.
And I agree. And I think that what she's saying is, I'm thanking you, world, for giving me such intense colors and stories and, drama and layers. And that's what I'm getting from it. That's what she's thanking all the unknowns, because she will make them known.
But
That's
by your logic,
Anyway.
she's not making them known. She's just like using them. It's like a Kantian thing, right? Like she can't know the thing in itself. She just kind of knows her projection onto it, right?
But also, as she makes up the story, it's like we're skipping the whole part about the actual story. Like, I don't think writers write for the skeleton outline, which is, I made up a character. What I say in all of those paragraphs is neither here nor there. It's just the plot that we're looking at, which is, she made up a story, she was incorrect, and the end. And so there's
What's
so
the
much
name of
in
the
here that
story?
I think she wants us to look at that is completely being overwhelmed by this idea that we have, right? There's so much about, okay, so we got through the spot and we said something about that, but what about this Morgridge guy, Mogridge, this whole story. Have I read you right with the human face, blah, 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 that whole section?
Yeah.
There's stuff in there that we could probably discuss instead of arguing about what this story is.
I agree with you on that point. I'm just saying that, first of all, what's the name of the story?
Yeah, I wondered.
It's an
I wondered
unwritten novel.
if she came up with that title.
I think Virginia Woolf did it for a reason. Again, this is coming out of a time period where there was a lot of experimentation going on, and literary forces were changing. How stories and novels were being written and conceived were changing. So, anyway,
and I'm sure all that's true. And I get it. Like, I'm sure there's a very, if you know all the history, but like, sometimes it's nice to just read something and not.
I totally agree.
Read all of the analysis about it, and like, you know what I mean? It feels a little like, it's nice to just read it and just be like, what do you get out of it? Like, what does it mean to you?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
And
the other thing about it is that literary critics are like this woman on the train. They fall back on their favorite narratives of like, oh, reality is constructed or this or that. And they'll just make the story about that. And it sounds like with the first literary critic you were reading that, it was just, this story is about postmodern,
Metafiction,
like deconstruction or something, you know what I mean? Like, and it's like,
yeah, postmodern. Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
And it's sort of like, whatever. I think that it's good to kind of step away from the literary critics, because often they're just not like really engaging with the story. They're engaging with their own kind of in-group and marketing plan for how to do politics in academia.
And there's so many things in here, like I know
Well,
we don't necessarily have time to discuss, but it's like there's parts in here that I feel like, oh man, I don't understand most of the story. Yes, and now you lay across your knees a pocket handkerchief into which drop little angular fragments of eggshell, fragments of a map, a puzzle. I wish I could piece them together. If you'd only sit still. She's moved her knees, the maps in bits again. Down the slopes of the Andes, the white blocks of marble go bounding and hurtling, crushing to death the whole troop of Spanish muleteers with their convoy, Drake's booty, gold and silver, but to return, dash. And it's the end of the, and it's like, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah,
What is all
there's a
that
lot
about?
of, so, you know, as I was thinking about pushing the episode back like a good 2 hours actually, because I was like, there were so many, I was rereading it this morning and it's like, there's so much in here that's so difficult to parse. And I think that with the eggshell thing, maybe it's, you know, she's like ripping up little pieces of paper or something. And
well, there's like this idea, there's eggs, and it felt like, you know, this woman maybe didn't have kids, maybe she was barren, like what, I don't know. There's something in there about that.
that's the
And
narrator's
I, like,
own
need to
flight
know
of fancy,
now.
I think. And I kind of wonder, like, why is the narrator then going to these thoughts herself, right?
Right. Yeah.
what do you mean? Going to
Well,
these
she's
thoughts herself?
projecting, basically, right? So it
Right.
tells us more about the narrator. We know more about the narrator at this point than we actually know about the person that she's observing, because these are all made up in her mind. So theoretically, these are things that she imagines to be possibilities because they're in her imagination. So they're of her.
Right.
So
That's really, in many ways, what many people feel about this story, that it is, you know, the imagination. It is the story that reflects the process of imagination.
But it's her imagination. This is not where my mind would go if I saw it. I would make up a different story and it would reflect my own life experiences and my own neuroses and issues. And so it's like, that's what kind of makes me think this whole egg thing made me think that
Absolutely.
the woman is definitely a woman. The narrator is definitely a woman. There are a couple things in here and I can't remember what they were. Oh, there was one that really was like, oh, this is definitely a woman writing this. Even notice the N-word in here.
Yeah, I was wondering if you guys were going to bring that up.
I think those were like people, like entertainers by the beach while she, okay, so the narrator is imagining this Minnie woman walking by the beach and seeing entertainers, I guess.
Yeah, an entertainer, a funny guy.
Well, someone in blackface, but in any event.
A clown.
Yeah.
But yeah, that word, yes, granted, yes, the N-word is there, but the N-word was used at that time in the 1920s and not.
Yeah, no, I'm not complaining.
Now.
It's one of these things. Whoa.
Anyway,
I know. I didn't even
like
I listened to this book several times because they have an audio version of it.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, whoa, I just saw that there and I'm like, oh, I didn't really notice that. I don't know how I didn't notice that.
I am so thrilled to hear how much you guys really love the story, because I adore it, and it's just, you know, to me it does speak of a writer, you know, creating a character, given that I'm a writer and I do that, so I'm aware of that. Maybe that's why I tied into that stuff. But anyway, you know, maybe someday we can do a part 2.